And welcome, everybody. I am so thrilled today to have an amazing producer, multi-instrumentalist, uh, incredibly awarded and recognized producer, drummer, engineer, songwriter for the show today. My guest is Mr. Andy Kravitz, ladies and gentlemen.
Hey, Rob. Thanks for having me on the PMP Rob Mullins broadcast.
Thank you so much, man. I got a quick commercial I need to do before we dive into your amazing life. BodyRejuvenationCandles.com is sponsoring today's show. They're candles with a purpose to emit light and to moisturize and rejuvenate the skin as a lotion. They're incredibly therapeutic for dry skin, and I use them, and I love them, and you'll love them too. Okay, so Andy, how's it going?
It's going so good.
You know what's great is that I asked, as with all my guests, I say, please send your bio over before the show, and then I opened it up, and it's so lengthy. I think we either have the option of just reading your bio, and that'll be like the show, or just getting a chance to chat with each other, because it's just staggering the amount of things you've done in your career. Some of the artists that Andy's worked with are Lana Del Rey, or is it Lana Del Rey? Lana Del Rey, the Rolling Stones, the Police, Sting, Billy Joel, Aerosmith, Joan Osborne, James Taylor, Taj Mahal, John Lennon, Yoko Ono, Scott Page, Phil Ramone, Imogen Heap, Billy Bob Thornton, Robbie Krieger from The Doors, Cypress Hill, Dionne Warwick, Hootie and the Blowfish, Kamasi Washington, Dwight Tribble. I'm already getting tired. It's just, and then, then folks, I got to scroll down to another page of them. Vinny Caggiano, Boiler Room, Bronx Style Bob, excuse me, I got a scratchy throat today. The Venice Philharmonic, Cheaters, James Taylor's Hourglass, Singularity, Billy Joel, River of Dreams album, The Wailing Souls. Holy smokes, dude. It's like, so I want to go back kind of to the beginning of when we first got to know each other, and I came in your studio. You had a thing on the wall about Billy Joel, and I remember asking you. I was like so impressed, because I know Liberty DeVito did that gig for many years as the drummer, but you were just in high school, and you went from high school to playing drums with Billy Joel. How the heck did you pull that off?
Well, when I was about 16, I was lucky enough to get a job at the best recording studio in Philadelphia, run by just the best cats, the Butcher Brothers, Joe and Phil Niccolo.
Okay.
And they took me under their wing. And when I got down there, being a drummer, they showed me like how to edit tape. And I was instantly like one of the best editors down there, because I knew where all the beats fell. And,
Oh, right.
And they called me Andrew Scissorhands. That was my nickname at the studio. And so I don't know what it was, but like I started answering phones and started getting gigs playing drums and doing engineering and stuff and getting a break. And at one point, I remember one day, like it was like this guy came through the front door. It was like a vision. I can't remember who he was, but he said, "Hey kid, you stay right where you are and don't move a muscle, because everyone in the world is going to come through this door." And darn it, if he wasn't right. And
Wow.
So pretty soon, by the time I was 22 years old, I had, my credit list was like I was playing on Billy Joel. Like we did a remix, started off as a remix for Columbia Records. And the Butcher Brothers were known as fixers. So we would get projects out, we would get like a Sting album that the label wanted, could you make it more Every Breath You Take? And they wanted, Virgin Records wanted a Rolling Stones remix that was more like Undercover of the Night. Like, you remember the Sly and Sly and Robbie remix that they did.
Right, right.
And that became like so we would fashion these mixes, and more often than not, they would end up on the album and on the radio. So when people would hear it on the radio, they go buy the record. Now, sometimes our version wouldn't be on the record, sometimes it would.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, these things, these things have a trajectory. I was in the Bahamas a couple of years ago, and I heard our Sting remix in the lobby of my hotel. Like, hey, that's me.
Isn't that great, man?
Yeah.
Well, the thing that I have always just been kind of blown away in regards to you and your talents in your studio, which is obviously unbelievable. You can see all that gear there in the shot, and we'll get to talking about some of that. But the thing that's amazing is your versatility and your ability to adapt to all these different artists. And I mean, these are a lot of big time stars, and I'm sure it's not always, just real easy and simple with people at that level, right?
Right. Sometimes each session and each group has their own sort of set of general principles, you could call it. So you have, it's kind of like wag the dog. Does the dog wag the tail, or does the tail wag the dog? There's usually a leader. There's like usually a figurehead to every, like if you're working with bands, there's a point person and it trickles down. So it just depends. And sometimes, sometimes things get heated, or, making records is kind of like grinding out a diamond. It's kind of like polishing a diamond. So there's a little bit of friction there, and eventually everybody gets in there, and we all work together, and we're all fighting on the same side, trying to make great music and make the world a better place, and bring the light.
Well, did you know from the time you were like 5 or 6 or something that you wanted to do this? Yeah, because I remember I was 10 years old when I decided I wanted to be in music.
Yeah, it came to me quite early. I think I was 6 or 7, and I was like, hey, I want to take up the drums. And my mother was like, okay, well, this guy Jim up the street, he teaches drums. And so I had this teacher come in. The feeling I had when I was 8 years old was that I'm too old to start learning an instrument. I already had this feeling I hit them an old soul, but I thought, oh, it's gonna be 22 years till I'm any good. And you know what? I was right. It takes a while. It's like I feel like I'm just starting to, get my touch together. I heard, I've heard drummers say that over the years. Roy Haynes and different cats, and it's like, it takes a while. I mean, you can hit a drum, and then you can finesse it, you can caress it, and there's so many ways to play an eighth note, and it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing, right?
Right, that's from Duke Ellington. Well, one of my buddies, who's a drum teacher in Denver, his name is Mike. He always tells the students, he says, you'll have all of your fun playing the swing eighth notes, and you'll make all your money playing straight eighth notes.
That's interesting. I like that.
Right. So, but you play other instruments besides the drums too. I mean, I've seen you in there with you've got a bunch of little keyboards now going there on top of the grand piano, and then you can pick up a bass or a guitar if you have to.
I really have the piano for guys like you, Rob. Like, you're a monster, just a genius player. And I was singing your praises earlier today. But I dabble in other things. I play a little bit of bass. I play a little bit of keyboards and synthesis. I do synthesis. A little bit of synthesis here and there. But I tend to focus on, I've always been like the drummer. I wanted to always just be like really, focused on that for many years. And over the years, my credits have grown like on records to like playing keyboards on records. Like I see credits. It's like, oh, that's right. Yeah, I play keyboards on this. Now I don't think of myself as a keyboard player. I'm more like Johnny One Note. I can come in and barrel roll up and play the right note. The note. So yeah. So, but I definitely love the variety, and being in the studio allows me that. So like, you know, whether it's drums or overdubs or mixing, mastering with Warwick, or engineering or sitting back and hosting. I just love the variety of in the lifestyle of this. It's really worked out for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at all of the walls of stuff there. I mean, how did you learn to, that's a whole different thing than playing drums. I mean, how did you learn to wire all that stuff, and what does it all do and all that?
Right, exactly. Well, you can see, I don't know if you see the scopes up here. My father was an electrical engineer and taught physics and chemistry at University of Pennsylvania in the 60s.
Oh,
When I was growing up, I had like the oscilloscopes that I was noodling with and sine waves, and I could make the different things go. And I just thought it was like the coolest thing ever.
right, sure.
Actually, so the story goes, I was 5 years old in my father's basement, who had a tech shop down there. And you know how all the old guys have drawers of parts,
Right.
components and stuff. And he had this box that was a Heathkit radio. It was
Oh,
a kit,
yeah.
Heathkit, right? So, it's like do it yourself, and it had all the parts, and it had like, vector board, and you could like solder the different transistors and this and that, and then wire a switch. So
Right.
the story goes that he came down the stairs one day, and I had found this Heathkit radio and soldered it together. And, except it was missing one part. I was like, Dad, everything's here, but this one, I can't find a resistor for these two little holes right here. So we went through the drawers, and he's like, oh, here you go. Here's a 10K resistor. Put it in. We put it in, turned it on, and it worked.
Wow.
So from that day forward, I was an engineer. I guess we call that kind of, real engineers can fix stuff and build things. Like back in the day, Phil Ramone, world-renowned producer, rest his soul, built his own board, which was literally boards. It was wood. And then he had stacked different components, Altec, some Ampex mixers.
Wow.
On that microphone. And the next thing you know, he's recording Girl from Ipanema. And so people used to go to different studios for the sound of that room.
Right.
Today's studios, it's a little bit more linear. So you've got the program. Most people work in Logic, Ableton, or Pro Tools. But those are basically a capture system, a recording system with everything ever made on the screen, but it's all what you do with it. So when these computers first came out, I thought, wow, it's kind of leveled the playing field, but it really didn't. It's all what you do with it, and you need to know why it's there and what it does. And so you're looking at every invention from every great engineer ever made on one screen.
Wow.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, well, I've been over at your studio there, hanging out outside with my friends and stuff. And I remember a couple of months ago, you were standing in your little perch, out there. You've got like a particular place that you stand, get some fresh air in between. And the FedEx guy comes rolling up, and he has a package for you. And you open up this package, and it's a snare drum from like the Civil War.
As a matter of fact, I have that drum right here. This was not planned, but I actually do have it right here.
Wow. Holy smokes, man.
An 1898 UG Lady, 15x4, and it's actually signed on the bottom by UG Lady's granddaughter.
Whoa.
Great granddaughter. So this is part of his personal collection. Incredible drum. Yeah. I remember the day that came, I was like, Rob, check this out. Oh my God. Rub it up.
Yeah, I know. Well, you've got a lot of stuff packed into your space there, and people that haven't been by, they probably don't know that in the back there's got to be at least 30 snare drums. Maybe there's 60 snares or 100, and I just find it really interesting because a lot of studio guys get like a certain thing and then they just stop. They're like, okay, I got this and that, but you always seem to be trying to push like, onto this other higher level, and part of that involves getting new gear, right?
Exactly. I love buying old gear and using it and incorporating it into things and getting that vintage sound. And using it in a modern context, it sounds modern. It sounds like nothing else. And Lenny Kravitz got me into that when we worked together. He was like, yeah, it's all about the old drums. And I was like a Yamaha guy and like a Sabian guy and this and like modern stuff. But I still love all that stuff. But they have a sound like Yamaha kick drums always had that super punchy sound. But these ukulele drums, these things from the 1800s and the early 1900s have just this incredible seasoned sound. You know, I like to say, you know, it might be a 120-year-old snare drum, but before it was a snare drum, it was a tree. You know, it was way up in the air. Someone decided to fell the tree and make a drum out of it. So
wow.
Yeah, so I love buying and selling old gear. You know, I used stuff for a long time, and it's been sort of my business model as well. And you know, a lot of these things are semi-mass produced, so there might be 1,000 federal limiters out there, and you know, there's maybe, you know, a few thousand Pultecs in the world, but you know, so they come and they go. And people ask me, where do you get your old gear? And I say, old guys. Old guys have old gear.
There you go.
There you go.
Well, it's an amazing looking room, and I know from working in the room by your side on many projects, it's an incredible sounding room. Now, the last time I was by, you were working on, I think it was an Ivan Neville project.
That's correct.
And what you were doing, I thought was really interesting because you were working on the drums, and you had recorded, you know, kick, snare, hi-hat, or whatever in the kit, but I think you were replacing something that was already there with new drums, or maybe you were just putting the drums on. But you had this, like the snare and the kick were just, it's just like, I mean, they were so giant, but still you managed to, you know, as a producer, like I've heard guys say the snare drum and the lead vocal need to be about the same level. Is that true, or is it just depend?
In modern rock and in modern music, it's always about the vocal. So everything, and as it relates to the vocal is number one. The vocal is king, and the vocal is our hero. And then, you know, you hear, you know, usually in modern music, you've got the snare, the drums just under that, and then you either have, depending on where the kick drum sits, the melody and where the bass is, and what's happening with the bass. It's usually kick on top of the bass or bass on top of the kick, but the rule is you can't have both, because it becomes too bassy, too whoopy.
Too fat on the low end, yeah.
Right, exactly. So it's like, it's usually, you know, if it's highly melodic and the bass is following a lot of the melody, which a good bass player will, a good bass player will lock down into the drums and support the melody. It kind of has the silent, most important gig in the world, making everybody else sound good.
Right. Well, there's bass players out there who, and I've worked with them in the 80s and stuff, who just became so excited about the virtuosic possibilities on the bass after Jaco Pastorius came around.
Yeah, Jaco.
And a lot of these guys that I knew back then, I mean, I had to even stop hiring them because they were just so fluent and so in the higher register. Right. I remember turning around one night on a gig in Westwood to this cat, and I'm like, dude, can you just like stay in your area, you know?
Yeah, stay in your lane. It's usually the bottom two strings on the bass or where it's at. I mean, if you play an E on the thinner string, it's not the same E as you play on the fat string. I always encourage people to stay down into bass player mode. You know, I know some keyboard players who can actually play drums and bass at the same time as they're playing keyboards. I think this guy's name is Rob Mullins.
Oh, I've heard of him.
I've heard of him, right? He's extraordinary. But like, you know, I know what you mean. It's like sometimes, I mean, as a joke, it's kind of a bass player joke, but it's like, you know, you turn around to the bass player who's playing too many notes, and you go like, "Are you getting paid by the note?" And I don't know it. He was so worked out.
Well, it's an interesting thing, you know, because your background is just much more diverse than mine, I think. And I've been in jazz mostly all these years, but it's an interesting thing with trying to get jazz people to understand what an album concept is or what a live gig concept is, because everybody's in what you call the woodshed and they're practicing their John Coltrane stuff for 8 hours, and then they take a shower and they drive down to the thing and they're going to play every John Coltrane thing
Right.
they know to man in front of the gig.
All their influences. They're going to bring it all onto the gig. Everything.
They're going to bring it all on the gig, and I've had to sit, you know, with entire bands, and you probably have had to do this in the studio too, and say, the star of the show is the song. The star of the show is not you. Yeah. The star of the show is not me. The star of the show is the song, a well-written thing, and we're trying to bring this song to life as a group. It's a group effort. It's not about, I can play my trumpet 4 octaves higher than Maynard Ferguson. Look at me.
Right.
Right. And I mean, you know, it's a different planet, because don't you find as a producer, you have to have, like, the vision starts with you, right?
Well, yeah, you're there as you're a coach. You're there to kind of guide and create a tack, you know, like in boating. It's like a boating term, a little tack, you know. You know, if you're, for instance, if you're on a boat and you're like, well, we're aiming for Australia, you know, and it's, you know, however many thousands of miles away. If you're a quarter inch off, you're going to be like 400 miles off the mark, you know? So you really kind of have to kind of adjust and yeah, and so it's all about the song, and it's all about the vocal in the song, if there is a vocal. And you know, we're there to illuminate the song from the inside out. Okay. And you know, if that means just playing 2 and 4, and you know, there's, you know, I always think, like, I love the fades of any song. At the very end, you turn it up, and it's like always something really cool going on in the fade. Save it to the fade and choose your moments. You know, like if you want to put in that John Coltrane lick, choose your moment where the vocal's not singing, where there's like a spot. You know, like an actor, you're choosing your moment. You take your moment. You know.
Right. Yeah, I remember. I think it was Ricky Lawson, who was an amazing drummer, and Ricky and I became really close friends, you know, God rest his soul, years ago. And he would say, they're paying me not to play fills. Like, you know, I hear all this stuff that I could do, and they're saying, please do not do.
Yeah. Now we know what we don't want.
Right. So, well, I want to go back into some of these things, like the Lana Del Rey thing. I mean, in one paragraph, you got Lana Del Rey, who's like kind of like a sexy, you know, kind of badass, kind of pop star. And then in the one line under that is a Christian singer that you worked on. So do you have to adapt, like, your studio presentation to fit these, like, enormously different types of folks that come around?
I do. There's subtle differences, and I try to really pay attention to people when they come in and their needs. And it's a lot of times it's just you're listening. You know, you're listening. If you listen, people tell you what they want, and depending on what they don't say or how they say it, kind of leads by example. And then at a certain point, it's like it might take 45 seconds, but you gain their trust. And all of a sudden they're saying, what do you think? What do you want? What do you think I should do? You know, I trust you. You know, so you have to gain trust through that. It's a give and a take.
Right. Yeah, that trust factor is really important, because don't you find that, you know, the whole songwriting thing is like super personal anyway.
Yeah.
And, you know, people put into their songs all of this stuff that doesn't happen in their real life. Like, I've had people say, well, you know, you're not talkative enough, or you won't share, you know, enough of your thoughts with me, or whatever. And I just go, listen to the frickin' songs, man.
Yeah.
Right? Because people put these things in the songs, like they put everything they've got in it. So it's almost like, in a way, you're like cradling this baby, right?
Right.
when people come in and you're going to help this thing grow from just being a girl sitting there with her guitar to this amazing final thing.
Right. Like it's so much like therapy in a lot of ways. And it's like, it's better than any big pharma prescribed drug. Just music as a form of expression alone. It's not about having a #1 hit or going for the Grammy this or the Grammy that. It's about music as a form of expression, Tom down.
Right.
And that's basically what it's about. And I've had people come in, they literally come in, we talk, then they go into the booth, play their song, and come out. They might even walk into the booth like kind of broken, not feeling tip top, and they come out after expressing themselves with like lightning bolts shooting out of their head.
Wow.
Really, and it's amazing to watch that transformation. That's like one of the most fascinating things to me is not just being an audience member, but just imagine being the performer and how that transforms you.
Yeah, and then
a lifetime of that, multiplied by a lifetime, it really can intone you, and
well, the trust that people put in you, like I remember coming in with the first couple of times that I brought a project in, and I just had this feeling of he knows what everything does in the room, first off, and that kind of stuff just baffles me. I mean, I kind of, I can engineer a little bit on computers and this and that, and I can put down a piano track or whatever, but all of that, but I felt instantly like you really cared about having me in there and that you were super confident.
Yeah.
I mean, you're just extremely confident about you're going to be able to make something happen. And then, you give people options too. I remember we were sitting there listening to something, you go, oh, what if I did this? And you go, and then the song just goes.
Or why don't we do that?
Yeah, and then it's pretty cool because a lot goes into it. Now, all of these people on here, one of the bands is Cypress Hill.
Correct.
And Cypress Hill, for people are too young to know about them, is they had this hit. It was one of the early like rappy tunes. It was called "Insane in the Membrane."
Right.
And back when MTV was actually playing music videos, and when it wasn't all episodes of Teen Mom and ridiculousness. Have you seen that show they have on now?
I haven't seen that. I think I'm a
It's called Ridiculous.
Really hard to keep going.
Yeah. But Cypress Hill was like huge, and MTV really did kind of break them and make them this huge star. Then what did you do with those guys?
Well, getting back to Studio 4 recording in Philadelphia, which now I have Studio 4 West out here. So we have the annex, the West, the West Coast annex continuing. The legend continues.
Right.
We started a hip hop label in the 90s called Rough House, and I was one of the founding staff producer, staff musician, A&R, and so we had a distribution deal on Columbia Sony.
Wow.
So we put out like these, I wouldn't call them hits, I would call them phenomena. It was like more like we had Crisscross, which were the two kids who wore their pants on their head and walked upside down. And
I remember those
pretty
guys.
soon, like everyone's walking down the street on their hands, pants on their head. So, and then we signed Cypress Hill and the Fugees, and we did a lot of like, hardcore, gangster rap, but it's now regarded as like the golden age of hip hop.
Really?
So some of the records I did became Eminem's favorite albums, like the Tin Dog records. Like those are his favorite records, and I was fortunate enough to meet Mike D from the Beastie Boys pretty recently, and he came up to me at a restaurant and said, "Hey, you're Andy Kravitz. You did all the beats on the Schoolie D records. Those Schoolie D records inspired the Beastie Boys. There would be no Beastie Boys had it not been for what you did."
Wow.
And that's like, wow, that's a real accolade. And we were at a Chinese restaurant, and it's like choking on a dumpling, like, oh my gosh, this is it's unbelievable, And he was like,
wow.
"Oh, and what reverb did you use on the snare?" Like looking for the little secret sauce. Like, It was this, it was that, and so yeah, so these hip hop records that I've done back in the day really have influenced a lot of people, shockingly enough. And I was 17, 18, 19 years old doing these. It's like, and the opportunity came to me through the fact that it was a new genre. There was no hip hop chart at that time. You had
Mhm.
the Hot 100, and you remember the Black chart.
Right.
It was the black, it called the Black chart. So um, after the first hip hop record that I really did beyond Schoolie D was Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. I
Ah.
did albums for them. I did Rock the House and He's the DJ, I'm the Rapper with Girls Ain't Nothing But Trouble. And I remember hearing that song and I got goosebumps on my arm. I was like, oh my God, this is something. Something's going to happen. And next thing you know, it was the first rap Grammy, and all of a sudden you have the rap chart. So I was there at the dawn of hip hop, just because no one else was there. I was like, hey, it's 5 o'clock. The rappers are coming in. You want your chance to do a session? Here's your shot. And pretty soon I was calling the shots, like as an engineer. Hey, I hear live drums on this. Maybe perhaps you want to put drums on it. I know a guy. I know a guy. So I got to play on a lot of these hip hop records. Get to play on Jazzy Jeff, Tim Dog, Cypress, Crisscross, everything that came through.
Yeah, man. Well, what about when the drum machine got invented? Like, did you consider that something positive for drummers, or do you consider it? Because I talked to a lot of guys who are like, man, the drum machine killed my career. I mean, obviously it hasn't killed yours.
Right. It's interesting. At that time, growing, I was born in the 60s. You grew up in the 70s, the 70s rock on the radio. And then like when I got into the studio, it was like 1980, 1981, 82. And drum machines came in. I was like, oh no, like, I've been studying drums my whole life, and now, it's passe to like play an instrument in a way.
Uh-huh.
Kind of felt that way, but these drum machines are interesting because you've got a drum machine, you've got a pad, and you've got a snare drum sound on that pad. Now, on that snare sample is the work of everyone that came before you. There's Steve Gadd, who's playing the drum. There's Al Schmidt, who knows, some famous engineer dialed it in, and then it was programmed and truncated and filtered by the guy at EMU Drumulator or Roger Lynn.
Right.
So really, all these MIDI instruments and all these drum machines, you're automatically standing on the backs, totemistically, of all of these people that came before you. So there's a lot of power in that. So, and there's, of course, the quantization, and I'm a beat maker, and you're just like hit quantize, and it's like, in a way, everybody's beat sounds the same.
Yeah.
Where's the swing? Where do the eighth notes fall? That's
Right.
that's where the rubber meets the road. And I got really good at making beats that had feel. Like I figured out through things like delays and programming part of a hi-hat and then playing the other part of it. Like quarter notes would be on the grid, figuratively. This is before the grid. This is before computer.
Uh-huh.
And then the eighth notes I would put in by hand, just slightly behind, so it swings. And then then sampling came in, and so we're, now you're sampling, like, let's say a Hubert Laws record. I think I know somebody who plays with Hubert Laws. His name's Rob Mullins.
I wonder.
He's
I've
amazing.
heard about that Rob guy with Hubert Laws. Yeah.
Yeah, he's incredible. He's got this podcast too.
Uh,
So yeah, so now you're sampling a Hubert Laws record for one measure. That's 4 beats, right? And then you're
Right.
looping. Now, on this record is, you tell me, James Gadsden on drums. The players, right?
Well, yeah.
The
Sometimes
engineers, the
it would be Ron Carter and Steve Gadd. It would be Bob James or Chick Corea.
Insane. And so you've got all of this talent and everything coming down into this record that's put out with the reverb and the engineers and the mastering, and it's off the vinyl.
Rudy
And
Van.
you're there pushing sample, loop, and it's like you're standing on the backs totemistically of all of these people that came before you. Once again, it's like you have to give it up, and
Right.
and not only did they not sample it at that time, they played a 4-minute version of it.
Okay.
Flawlessly. Like, you know, you're just taking a little snippet from a record.
Mm.
It's a microcosm, like they say, a world in a grain of sand, you know.
Right, right.
You can, you know, if you expand upon that, it's amazing. And so the hip hop thing brought in all of that sampling and the drum machine. So to answer your question, to make a long story slightly longer,
Even longer.
is to say, like, yeah, I was a little wigged out when drum machines came out, but once I bought my own Lin drum and started programming, it was like a lot of doors opened for me, because that was the way. And so, you know, like they say, you got to be 3 feet to get into Oz.
Yeah. I have a quick little Hubert Laws sampling story. So it was about 10 or so years ago, and Hubert is, you know, an LA-based guy, and he was in that era of the late 60s when all the stuff was happening, and he was in New York with his Fender Rhodes writing these massive tunes, and then he'd go on tour with Chick Corea, and then he was signed to CTI Records, and he did all this stuff. So Hubert gets this letter from LL Cool J's people, and it says, "Hey, Mr. Laws, we want to use, you know, 4 bars of this tune of yours." And
Or like Mama said, knock you out, or something like that, right?
it was a song called "What a Night," and you know, and we want to send it to you and get your permission, of course, you know, the great Hubert Laws, before LL Cool J and the label release this tune. So so they send Hubert the recording. He hates it. Like, he so hates it because it's one of these, you know, kind of profane and gangster, and Hubert is not about that stuff at all. Yeah. And so he gets pissed, and he calls his Ronnie Ivy, calls his lawyer, and he says, "Tell these guys I don't give my permission." And then, like 2 days later, it was all over the world without Hubert's permission.
Oh dear.
On radio all over the world, and it was this huge hit. So, you know, Hubert wasn't happy about it, but his lawyer, this is the way the story was told to me, the lawyer said, "Well, wouldn't you like a nice mansion in Hancock Park or something? Would that make you feel any better? Because I can get like $6 million out of these guys."
Yeah.
And Hubert was like, "Well, okay, maybe that'll be okay." So now he has this place on Rossmore that's got like his own tennis court in the back, and that's a 5-car garage, and there's like 4 Mercedes and an Audi. And then
He's doing all right. And isn't he the most sampled artist in history? Is it something like that? Like his records have been sampled by more hip hop guys than anybody, more than James Brown.
Yeah, it's him and ironically Bob James.
Right, Bob James. It's the Rhodes, right?
Yeah, it's
The
that
hip-hop,
road.
they love the Rhodes.
They love the Rhodes, man. And Hubert wrote all of his music of his career. He's written it on a Rhodes.
The Rhodes. Yeah.
He wrote most of it in New York in his apartment in Manhattan when he was at school. So
yeah.
So, but yeah, that's a crazy thing when people kind of cross that moral and legal boundary. I mean, has that kind of stuff happened to you where you had something that was, you know, a recording and it wasn't supposed to come out and they hadn't paid you, and then, you know, I mean, how do you handle those kind of studio problems?
I've had that, you know. In fact, I've had it where they still haven't paid. It's not funny, but it's true. You know, I mean, I have to laugh about it, but you know, when you're younger, you don't realize necessarily the value of things. You know, like I made so many beats that got lifted and bit. Like I've done some of the most you know, ubiquitous drum loops that have been used a million times, and just because I didn't handle the business correctly as a 17-year-old,
oh well,
years go by and these things happen. And so, you know, it's good to have that discussion. You know, that's what I've learned. You know?
Well, it's like the Nike swoosh guy got $150.
Yeah,
the guy that came up with that little swooshy thing for Nike, he got $150. That was it.
that's it. Yeah, I think, you know, I think I got $50 for a Schoolie D record in the check bounce. You know, and then that ends up getting sampled. You know, it's like I'm in the negative.
Yeah,
But you know, other people get rich. You know, you know, what are you gonna do? You
the
know, yeah,
ruthlessness of some of the people at the top in the music business has never ceased to amaze me, because at some point, like if you had done all those beats, and it's now been 20 years or 30, and they've made $50 million off of that, wouldn't it make sense to just say, well, hey man, let's just kick down a million bucks back to Andy and some to the bass player, because we've made 50. But
yeah.
I don't see it ever working. At least for me, it's never worked like that. People just kind of take my stuff and run.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well. And it's like you kind of got to give it up to God. Say, you know, I'm just going to keep doing what I do. You know, if you know, it's you just it's leave it up to that and just do your thing. You know, and move on. And I'm just going to make more beats and make more music and you know help the world. That's what I'm here to do. And you know, that's really on them. And at the end of the day, that's just how some people are. You know, you're not going to change them.
Uh-huh.
You know.
Well, and speaking of which, you know, you can take Andy out of Philly, but you can't take Philly out of Andy. And I remember being at your place one time, and this truck pulls up, and it has Philly cheesesteaks flown in from Philly directly to your house. I was like, man, that is awesome. And you even gave me a sandwich out of that stuff. And you really can't like copy a Philly cheesesteak. Like, you know, around Southern California, there's a few transplanted guys.
There's a few. There's like a cheesesteak truck, and there's like 1,000 miles, you know, 3,000 miles to Philly place on Lincoln. But you know, I'm going to give a shout out to Mama's Cheesesteaks, Mama's Pizzeria in Ballard, which is right where I grew up outside of Philly. And you know, it's just a real taste of home. So every, you know, maybe a couple times a year, like we put a box of cheesesteaks on a first class seat on the plane and fly it out with the sauce and peppers, and, you know. And so shout out to Paul at Mama's Cheesesteaks, the best. And these things are incredible. Like they weigh about 2 pounds a piece. And
right.
Pure filet. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's and healthy food too. It's good.
Oh, it's so good for you.
So good for you. Especially when you have a cheese cake after the cheese steak.
Cheese cake and a cheese steak.
Yeah.
That's right. It reminds me of what Bonnie Raitt said to me.
What was that?
I was playing with Taj Mahal.
Okay.
And I did a fantastic Taj Mahal record, and a lot of people are all in there with Sheryl Crow, Doug Grigsby on bass, guys from the Hooters. And Bonnie Raitt was at our show at the Roxy, and she comes up and she goes to Doug and I, we're the rhythm section, she goes, I'm going to call you cheese and you steak. This is my Bonnie Raitt story.
Oh man. Oh gosh. Well, you know, it's incredible that you were able to carve this much time out in your day to be on my show. We're still a bit of a fledgling show, but we're having fun with it, and it's incredible. Everything you're doing is incredible. I mean, and obviously I can't thank you enough for showing up, and your mission statement of making everything better in the world. That's not an easy thing to do in this like rough and tumble, super competitive, like the music business has some good people in it, but it really has a lot of scary people that'll just stab you to death in it too. And it's great to see you so successful, like coming from 17 years old to wherever you're at now, and still look at that smile on your face and how happy you are to do what you do. It's really cool.
Well, that's exactly it. I really have joy for making music and making recordings and chatting with incredible musicians like you. I really appreciate you having me on your podcast. This is a rare pleasure, and I hope we get to do more.
We will, man. We'll do more, and you know, I'll let you know when it's going to be coming out. And do you want to play any? Did you want to play any music for anyone before we wrap?
Sure. I mean, I guess I could ask. Did I ever play my Rolling Stones remix? I'm actually.
No, well, the things that I really haven't heard that I want to hear is I want to hear the Sting thing that you did because I love Sting, and I
Yeah.
want to hear the Rolling Stones. I think we can squeeze those two in, right?
Squeeze them in. Let me see if I can find this Sting remix here. You got that? Charlie Watts did. Yeah, so that's the Sting remix I was
Okay,
lucky
boy.
enough to play on.
Wow, that's just incredible sounding. I love it. And then, hey, hit us with a little bit of that Rolling Stones thing before we wrap.
Sure, love to. There's an interesting story about this Rolling Stones remix.
Well, there's only like 3 drummers or 4 or something that ever played with them, right?
Right, yeah, Jimmy Miller, who produced, Beggar's Banquet, and he played on You Can't Always Get What You Want and a couple other tracks, and of course there's Charlie and Steve Jordan, Jim Keltner, and
Yeah.
so Sly Dunbar played on.
Oh,
And I got to do this track with the Butcher Brothers. I was part of the Butcher Brothers crew. We remixed a bunch of records, and so the story goes like this briefly. I get a call from my good buddy Phil Niccolo, Phil the Butcher.
I can't hear you right now that well.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me
Yeah.
now?
Yeah,
Okay.
better. Just come in. Well, yeah.
Okay. So my buddy Phil calls and he says, "Hey Andy, I need you to come down and play drums on a session for me. There's only one thing, that the band's unknown and they have no deal, and but you got to replace the drummer for me because I need you. Can you come down and just do it for free?" I was like, "Sure, Phil, man, absolutely, absolutely." So I come down, I set up my drums, I put on the headphones, and it's the Rolling Stones. And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, thank God you didn't tell me," So I got to play on. So I sit down. I play one take on this song, and I nail it. I get it down, and for probably one reason that for all of the what I might call all the stupid gigs I ever did, playing covers and playing for nobody, nobody in the audience, but kind of practicing for this moment, and it all came down to that, and I was somehow ready. Like I even knew what the changes were without even ever hearing it.
Wow.
So here's a little piece of it, and it's a nice intro with keys and everybody warming up, and then I just jump in on the drums. Tell me if this is up.
Yeah. Wait, man. Wait.
Yeah, very cool, Robster.
Wow, man. Well, look, I'll be dancing and bopping to the Andy with the Rolling Stones. My gosh, man, what a nice surprise for me to learn that about you. And thanks again to my sponsor, Body Rejuvenation Candles. This has been the Planetmullins podcast. Today, starring my special guest, Mr. Andy Kravitz. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you so much, Rob.
All right, man. I hope you have a wonderful